morning before slowly easing off. For most, tomorrow's a fine day with some good spells of sunshine for northern England. Wales, a brighter day compared to today. The odd shower across the far northwest. A fresher day for most as well, with temperatures high teens, low 20s. But still tomorrow, pretty warm, pretty muggy across East Anglia and the southeast, where we're likely to see those thunderstorms through the night. Clearing away those, we head towards the weekend, looking largely dry at this stage with sunny spells.
We are GB News, the People's Channel, and we are absolutely everywhere. Yes, we're on TV, radio and digital. And if you're a Virgin Media customer, well, we're now even easier to find. With GB News moving to channel 604. Don't forget, we're channel 216 on Freesat, 515 on Sky, 236 on Freeview and 236 on YouView. Join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Happy Ukrainian Independence Day, a day twinged with sadness, of course. For 6 months it has been since the full-scale invasion of that country began. Well, we'll be exploring what the war has meant for the United Kingdom, for our energy security and for peace and stability in the Western world. That, a little bit of Tory leadership and, of course, energy security here at home too. All to come on The Briefing after this.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Police continue to hunt for the gunman who shot dead a 9-year-old girl at her home in Liverpool on Monday night. Merseyside Police says the killing of Olivia Pratt-Corbell crosses every boundary as they urge for anyone with information to come forward. The force says Olivia died after a 35-year-old man ran into her terraced house, in an attempt to get away from a gunman. As Ukrainians mark Independence Day, the country's President Volodymyr Zelensky has issued an urgent warning about potential brutal attacks from Russia. The country is celebrating 31 years of independence today amid fears of strikes on highly populated areas. Ukraine has banned large gatherings for the event, and the government employees are being told to work from home. Today also marks 6 months since the Russian invasion began. Service on the Eurotunnel is back to normal after dozens of people had to be rescued when a train broke down between Calais and Folkestone. Video appears to show passengers in the Channel Tunnel being evacuated through an emergency service route after being stuck for 5 hours overnight. They were eventually transferred to a replacement train and taken to the Folkestone terminal in Kent. And a hosepipe ban impacting more than 15 million people in southern England has come into force today as Thames Water becomes the latest company to restrict usage. It's thought by the end of the week more than 29 million people in the UK will be under some form of hosepipe ban as more companies enforce restrictions. The Environment Agency reported 10 out of 14 regions are in drought. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Tom with the briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, last night, the latest Tory leadership hustings took place in Birmingham, with Liz Truss pledging to push back against identity politics, emphasising her pledge to raise defence spending to 3% of GDP as well by the end of the decade, and reaffirming her intention to slash taxes and expand grammar schools. Rishi Sunak, on the other hand, re-emphasised his commitment to cut VAT on energy bills, a U-turn on his no-tax cut position he set out at the start of the campaign. The former Chancellor also said that he would increase stop and search as Prime Minister, doubled down on his intention to issue fines to those who miss GP appointments, and called Scottish nationalism, quote, very seductive, saying that he will fight that seduction by speaking to people's hearts as Prime Minister. Well, there are 12 days to go until the winner is announced at midday on the 5th of September. Voting closes 3 days earlier, a week on Friday. But now to international news, albeit news that affects our security, both national and economic, here at home. Today marks a bittersweet milestone for the people of Ukraine. Firstly, as they celebrate their 31st Independence Day from communist Soviet rule, all while the country continues to defend that priceless independence as a sovereign state from Putin's war of aggression, a war which started 6 months ago to this day. Let's remind ourselves of the timeline of this conflict. Of course, in February and March of 2014, Russia invaded and annexed the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine. The world did little to stop him. And as with so many other appeasements of history, that inaction did not solve the situation. No, Putin did not stop in Crimea for long. Emboldened by the inaction and, frankly, weakness of the West, on the 24th of February this year, 8 years after Russian troops first entered part of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin ordered a full-scale attack on that country. On the 8th of March, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky made his first address to the UK Parliament as civilians were given permission to evacuate Ukraine through humanitarian corridors. And on the 4th of April, mass graves were discovered near Kyiv, with Zelensky accusing Russia of genocide. Then on the 9th of April, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson made his first visit to the war-torn country as a strong show of support. On the 27th of June, following further escalation, Russian missiles struck a shopping centre in the city of Kremenchuk, killing more than 20 people in a residential area. And on the 1st of August, the first vessel carrying Ukrainian grain left Odessa under a UN and Turkey brokered deal between Ukraine and Russia. Just a flavour of the last 6 months of terror for the Ukrainian people. But of course, they are fighting back and fighting back strongly. The Russians have retreated from Kyiv, and there is every chance that the Ukrainians could push them further, push them east of the Dnieper River. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by the former Defence Secretary, Dr. Liam Fox. And Liam Fox, thank you for joining us today on this seismic anniversary, not just the 31st anniversary of Ukrainian independence, of course, but the 6-month anniversary of the invasion of that country. I wonder now, looking forward, do you sense that there is still the resolve, not just in this country, but across the Western alliance, to continue to support Ukraine and to continue to push back the aggression of the Russians?
Well, there has to be that will, because it is the front line for the rest of us. In the timeline that you drew, I think it's also important to say that back in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, Vladimir Putin set out a view of what he thought Russia would be, and the West just didn't really want to believe that that's what he was saying. A year later, we had the invasion of Georgia, again, where we did very, very little. And of course, then we got, as you said, Crimea and now the southern part of Ukraine. And it's vital that the Western countries understand, the free world, in fact, understands that if you're not willing to stand up to illegal international aggression, as we've seen against Ukraine, then that will only embolden those who have taken that action to do it elsewhere. And it's not just Russia we're talking about. We're talking about Iran, wondering whether it will actually get away with getting a nuclear weapon. Do you really want to see Iran emboldened by having a nuclear weapon with the disruption that it could bring, not just to the region, but to global fossil fuels as well? So it's very important that the international community makes a stand, and it's very important, as you alluded to, that European countries in particular, who are on the front line, make very clear to Putin that he cannot remotely think about threatening any European or NATO member.
Did Western countries, leaderships of all different parties in this country and beyond, fail in the decade or more leading up to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Did we, to some extent, embolden Putin to go further by not being so strong, by choosing to appease? Did we almost ensure that this invasion would take place?
I think that really from the early part of the 2000s, when we had the stolen election in Ukraine, the Russianing poisoning of the leader of the opposition, when we saw the action that Russia was taking and of Putin's narrative, I think that we substituted wishful thinking for critical analysis, or at least a number of people did. And I think that was particularly true in Central Europe, particularly in Germany and in France, where they wanted to believe that Putin was something other than he was. It fitted the domestic narrative at that time. And I think it shows the danger of failing to recognize at all times that protection of our people, the security of our nation, is the number one duty of the government, irrespective of what it costs elsewhere.
Now, of course, Liam Fox, you're not just a former Defence Secretary, you were also the first International Trade Secretary that this country has had in our post-Brexit independent trade policy area. And now, today we're learning that the United Kingdom is starting digital trade negotiations with Ukraine in a hope to bolster their economy, in a looking forward view to rebuild that country. Is this something that can be achieved relatively quickly? And how important could it be to not just bolster the Ukrainian economy, but help ours too?
Well, it's very important that we look in terms of our future trade and investment relationships with countries where we can help their economies to develop. That's not just Ukraine, but that's right across places like Africa and Asia, where if we are able to help countries develop the skills they need to be modern economies, they will have a greater demand for the sort of goods and services that the UK produces. When you're able to get trade and investment more open, it is a win-win for everybody. And if we actually want to deal with some of the issues around the world today, we've got to recognise the link between prosperity and security and ensure that we factor that in. A group that I chair, the Global Britain Commission, has brought out another report recently saying that Britain needs to think of global Britain, not just in terms of security and foreign policy, but prosperity at the same time, and factor them all together. So the relationship that we're talking about fostering with Ukraine would be part of that wider process, and we would be wise as a nation to speed up that process as quickly as we can.
Just finally today, it's getting very close to the end of this Conservative leadership contest. You, of course, have been a vocal supporter of Rishi Sunak. We had yet another hustings last night, this time in Birmingham. There's only a few more to go. And I just wonder, Liam Fox, is now the time that the rhetoric should be toned down? We've heard it get increasingly bitter. Conservative MPs saying that other Conservative MPs would push people into poverty and the rest of it. Is this not a gift to the Labour Party? Is it not time for a bit of a dialing down of that rhetoric?
Well, I think that the debate itself is really important, and it's really important that we understand the choices that we're making between what I would call fiscal conservatism, making sure we manage down our deficit and manage the public services, and what I would call dangerously unfunded tax cuts and increased borrowing. But I think you're right, it would be nice to conduct the debate with perhaps the rhetoric at a lower level, remembering that when this leadership campaign is over, Conservatives have to reunite. And I've seen, to be frank with you, in previous leadership campaigns, things that people have said in the heat of the moment that they have lived to regret for a long time. And I just hope that people will remember that on the other side of this leadership election, the important battle is not between different factions inside the Conservative Party, but against a potential Labour SNP coalition in our country that would not just wreck our economy, but potentially pull our union itself apart. That's the real battle that's coming.
Profound words. Well, Liam Fox, always appreciate your time on this programme. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. Well, now let's get more on this anniversary, on this double anniversary. I'm joined now by the news editor of the Kyiv Post, Jay Beecher. And Jay, what are the people of Ukraine feeling today? Of course, it's normally a celebration, 31 years of an independent sovereign state free of Soviet control. But this year, a very different sort of anniversary too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for having me on, Tom. But there's mixed emotions in Kyiv today. So they're very, very patriotic here. They are very celebratory of their independence, as they should be, and their sovereignty. But at the same time, we've had big threats from Russia. There's propaganda stating that they're going to launch a big attack today all over Ukraine. And the problem is, it's easy to dismiss those rumours and the intelligence, but you just cannot tell what Russia's going to do next. And that has been the problem throughout. We've had this could have all been prevented a very, very long time ago if we just stood up to Russia, if Britain and the rest of the West had stood up to Russia. So, people are out celebrating still. The celebrations in public have been cancelled due to safety reasons, but people are still wearing the flags. People are still flying the flags and wearing the colours. They're very patriotic here, and they're very determined. They're a very, very resilient people.
And as you say, no big official marches or parades or celebrations because of the risk that Russia might send missiles into the crowds of civilians, as we've seen, unfortunately, far too often in this conflict. What sort of celebration are we seeing, and what's the tension there? Even though Kyiv is back up and running and people are moving back, we did, of course, see the American embassy just this week advise that Americans leave once more.
Yeah, well, the intelligence is quite strong. As we've seen and as you've acknowledged, civilians are targeted in this war. Russia can say otherwise. It's a complete lie. I've been to the front lines. I've been to Kharkiv, Bakhmut, Lysychansk. I've physically woken up one day to watch a house being blown up and a mother sifting through rubble, picking up keepsakes from her 7-year-old son who had been killed. There wasn't a military target in sight. Russia is not just trying to steal Ukrainian land, it is trying to run and is successfully running a campaign of psychological warfare. So we are seeing strikes on schools, on hospitals, transport all over. So the threat is very real. And so when you say, what's it like today, tense-wise, it's like it every day, if I'm completely honest. Kyiv is relatively safe. We have had some strikes since I've been here. But for the average Ukrainian, they just want to get on with their lives. They have a beautiful country, very advanced country. a very unique and individual culture that is completely separate from Russia. So they're going about their days. For instance, in our office today, we have a skeleton staff because we've given everyone the option to go home if they need to and feel a bit safe, because you just cannot tell. And that's the sad reality of children waking up to air raid siren every day and not knowing what's going to happen next.
Really harrowing. And of course, on the political side of this, we know how popular Boris Johnson has been in Ukraine. There have been so many stories of streets being renamed after him, upon the resignation of Boris Johnson. I think it was the National Railways of Ukraine changed briefly their logo on social media to add a mop of blonde hair. Today, Rishi Sunak has written in your newspaper, in the Kyiv Post, to say that he would almost carry on that legacy. Is there much recognition of what has gone on in British politics in Ukraine? And is there a certain sense of nervousness that British resolve might be lesser?
You only have to walk down the street, and particularly when they hear my British accent, they will normally say, Boris Johnson, thumbs up. Everyone has massive respect for Boris Johnson here. He was one of the first leaders to get stuck in, to offer his support to Ukraine. Britain has supplied a large amount of weapons and continues to do so. But that said, they cannot fathom here why the British media are slowly starting to decline in their coverage, with exception of GBNews, and I applaud you for doing that. And they're concerned that the new leader who takes over might not show as much support as Boris Johnson. And that would be a massive, massive shame, because we forget that this isn't just Ukraine's war. This is a war on our doorstep, on Britain's doorstep. It's a war in Europe, and it's by one of the most evil regimes that we've seen. And they aren't just threatening Ukraine. They won't just stop at Ukraine. So we should have nipped this in the bud a long time ago. Many years ago, we had the Salisbury poisonings. We had numerous incidents where Russia has shown its aggression against even Britain. And then we've had people like Theresa May who made a phone call, don't do it again, that sort of nonsense. We have not been strong as a nation in standing up to Russian aggression. And in lieu of that, they have grown bolder and stronger and created their own alliances. And it is a massive threat that we're just not acknowledging. The British press, with the exception of GBNews, is saying, journalists tell me in England that they have Ukraine fatigue, that they're bored of writing about Ukraine. Well, they weren't bored about writing about Boris Johnson eating birthday cake for every single day for about a year. It's been absolutely ridiculous, and Ukrainians cannot understand why a British Prime Minister, who was as efficient as Boris Johnson was, has been pushed out over such a nonsense scandal, and they haven't taken into account the implications it has for the rest of Europe.
Really, really profound words there, Jay Beecher. Really appreciate your time this morning. Of course, news editor of the Kyiv Post, speaking there from Ukraine. Well, of course, the Ukrainian conflict has so many implications for security in the Western world, not least energy security, because in this country we're seeing our bills rise and rise and rise. So what can be done to try and address our energy security here in the UK? And what particular restrictions are we currently being imposed upon us unnecessarily by the government, which might be holding back our own energy security? Well, I'm joined now by Stian Westlake, Chief Executive of the Royal Statistical Society. And Stian, I want to discuss with you something really rather remarkable that was popularised in the press earlier this week. It's a provision of the Planning Inspectorate, which, when it gives planning permission for energy generation, whatever kind of energy generation that might be, renewable or otherwise, they appear to give a cap on the amount of energy that can be generated. What on earth's going on?
It's a crazy story, Tom. And it was discovered, it was kind of a weird detective story how it was discovered. Someone was looking at the Planning Inspectorate, UK Quango, their approval for a solar farm in Lincolnshire. And they looked at the small print, and it turned out that after all this litigation, they finally approved this project. And in the small print, it said, oh, by the way, we're limiting you to 300 megawatts of output. Now, what that means is if this power station, if the technology behind solar panels gets any more efficient over time, which it is every year, every month even, you can't generate more power from that existing field, even if you're willing to make that more investment. And what was fascinating is the lawyers, some guys from a firm called Pitman's, then started looking at some other provisions. And it turned out that these provisions were in all sorts of planning applications that have been granted, and not just for solar power, also for things like the Drax biomass generator, the West Burton Sea gas-fired plant, the South Humber refuse plant. Across the board, for reasons of kind of bonkers red tape, we have been limiting the energy efficiency of power plants that we have already granted approval to. Absolute madness.
I just find it incredible. I cannot get my head around why we have ended up in this situation. It doesn't change the look of any of these plants. If a gas power station wants to produce more power, why shouldn't it? And if someone wants to replace their solar panels with more efficient solar panels, why shouldn't they? I mean, what is the possible logic here behind bureaucrats capping the amount of energy that can be generated on specific sites? Is this just people wanting more power for themselves? Is this just an oversight? I mean, what is the logic here?
We've been scratching our head on this too, and the best explanation I can come up with is this is the sort of planner's mindset. That, you know, you ask for 300 megawatts and they say, okay, here is a license for 300 megawatts, and that's your limit. This is something that, as far as I can see, as far as the experts I've spoken to see, that we could easily change this rule. The Planning Inspectorate could easily change this. No one would be any the worse off, and we would make a small but important step towards improving the UK's energy security.
It seems to me that the way we control planning in this country is the most significant drag that we have on growth. Whether it's the Lib Dem Member of Parliament for Abingdon campaigning against collecting water in her constituency, campaigning against that sort of security, or people campaigning against building houses where it's most productive to build houses, or the planning system stopping energy generation as well. Whether it's our living situation, our water security, our energy security, so much of this all comes down to our planning system, and yet there doesn't seem to be much political will to take on the planning system that was given to us by our first potentially socialist Prime Minister in Clement Attlee. We haven't significantly reformed it since then. Why?
I think there's a big problem of siloed thinking. So people think about planning in one bucket, and they think about things like energy use and economic growth in another bucket, and they don't realise.
Oh, I'm very sorry to announce that we've lost Stian Westlake there. Really, really important subject, though, and something that politicians should be thinking about more. The structure of planning in this country comes from the 1948 Town and Country Planning Act, something that the socialist Clement Attlee instituted and hasn't been significantly changed since. Is it any wonder that we're not getting the growth that we need, that we're not building the energy that we deserve, that we don't have the houses to create that property-owning democracy that this country should be, and frankly, that we don't have the reservoirs either to get enough water in the summer? A real sad state of affairs. Well, that's all from me today. Catch me again, of course, 9:30 tomorrow. Coming up, it's To The Point with Mercy, but first, here's the weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. Contrasting fortunes today. A wet Wednesday for some, a hot one across East Anglia and the southeast. Pretty warm and humid out there right across the UK though this morning. Low pressure is in control, but it's really this weather front that's dominating the weather today because it's fairly slow moving. So if you're stuck under it, it's going to be cloudy and pretty wet, particularly for parts of South and West Wales. The rain may last for most of the day. Bit of rain this morning over northern England, easing away, as are the showers across Scotland. The rain, though, is likely to return to parts of northwest England, and still some heavier rain continuing continuing into the afternoon over parts of Wales and at times maybe into Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly too. Either side of that weather front, that rain band, most places dry. Hot one across East Anglia and the south east, 30 degrees is possible. Cool across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Pleasant enough, though, in the sunshine. Will turn quite windy here, though, in the far northwest later today. Small chance of 1 or 2 heavy showers this evening over East Anglia and the southeast. Much greater chance of that rain continuing over parts of northern England and Wales. And then, as we go through the night, eyes down to the south, because there is the likelihood of some thundery downpours drifting up from France across East Anglia and the southeast, where it will be another very warm and humid night. Now, we could do with the rain across East Anglia and the southeast, but this could be pretty intense rain, a lot of rain falling in a short space of time with some thunderstorms. So that could cause a bit of disruption. Likely to still be around on Thursday morning before slowly easing off. For most, tomorrow's a fine day with some good spells of sunshine for northern England and Wales. A brighter day compared to today. The odd shower across the far northwest. A fresher day for most as well, with temperatures high teens, low 20s. But still tomorrow, pretty warm, pretty muggy across East Anglia and the southeast, where we're likely to see those thunderstorms through the night. Clearing away those, we head towards the weekend, looking largely dry at this stage with sunny spells.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up